The history of heavy.
Welcome to the History of Heavy podcast, a show that traces the chronology of heavy music across genres, song by song. I am your co-host, Big Daddy Dave Lieberman, and over there is our host, get on the mic, Huntsman.
Get on the mic, Mike. Hello, Dave. You're hosting. I love this.
Yeah, it's all freestyle over here. We're getting loose.
You are the King Big Daddy Dave to my Mike H.
I love it. And we're a dynamic duo here talking about heavy again tonight. Tonight we have an interesting conversation where we go a little heavy adjacent, as we've done in the past, because we like to cast a wide net. With the heavy, we believe that heavy is a big tent. We're big tent heavy believers. And tonight we will be talking about The Payback by our friend James Brown. And there's a lot to talk about, a lot of pieces, a lot of ins, a lot of outs, a lot of what have yous. And to get us started, we always like to start with some context that comes from the Cultural Corner. Since I brought this song to the list, we are switching roles, and the Cultural Corner will be brought to you by our friend Mike Huntsman.
Days Control!
Take it away.
Mike on the mic. Yes, sir. Yes. As a reminder for those who aren't regular listeners to the show, but have tuned into this show that is called Heavy, but is about a James Brown song, heavy to us is not only a sound, but it is a state of mind. It is an emotion. It is a mindset. It is a desperation. It is an anger. And it is a mood, and that is no more applicable on any episode than it will be tonight. This is going to be, I think, a very fun conversation, actually two very fun conversations this week and next, as we are closing the year of 1973, which tonight's track came out in. We are closing the year with two funky-ass, badass tunes to again stretch that definition of heavy. So we have a lot of ground to cover between tonight's episode and next time that kind of reconstitutes, I guess, the way we perceive heavy and how we think about how the definition of heavy has evolved through the years. And so for tonight's Cultural Corner, I wanted to take a little bit of a broader, let's call it, approach. And I'm going to dig into a genre tonight for the Cultural Corner that is intrinsic to tonight's topic, but it is not a music genre. No, it is in fact a film genre, that being blaxploitation. Now, to set the scene a little bit, the broader exploitation film genre began really in earnest in the 1960s. And these exploitation films were notable for their explicit sex, sensational violence, drug use, nudity, gore, destruction, rebellion, and just general mayhem. Exploitation films sought commercial success by capitalizing on current trends, niche genres, or sensational content, sometimes all three of those things. These movies gained particular traction as the increasingly popular drive-in cinemas began to take hold and people began to watch movies in their cars in what is now a bygone era of drive-in cinemas, but was a very cool, important part of my childhood. Early examples of these exploitation films include Faster Pussycat, Kill Kill, which many people have heard of, Motorcycle, and Dave's favorite, Hell's Angels on Wheels. By the early 1970s, as Black civil rights movement, the Black Power movement, and the Black Panther Party were building cultural momentum, Black artists were focused on reclaiming the representation of the Black ethnic identity in the arts. This included Black filmmakers, who not only wanted to tailor their films to entertain Black audiences, but also wanted to offer strong, diverse characters that were a counterpoint to the stereotypical and often racist portrayals that Hollywood had been offering since the birth of cinema. The term blaxploitation was coined by one Junius Griffin, who was the president of the Hollywood branch of the NAACP, and he coined the term as a criticism of Hollywood's portrayal or mockery of the multiracial society in the U.S. 1971 was the breakout year for blaxploitation with the release of two classics, Sweet Sweetback's Badass Song, directed by Melvin Van Peebles, and Shaft, directed by Gordon Parks, and of course starring Richard Roundtree in the titular role.
I'm just talking about John Shaft.
John, shut your mouth. The subsequent 2 years, 1972 and 1973, saw the genre peak with the release of Superfly, Trouble Man, Black Caesar, Coffee, starring Pam Grier for her career-defining role, The Mac, and Foxy Brown, also starring Pam Grier. Many people listening to this podcast probably know a lot of these titles by name, but have never seen the films themselves, and that is likely due to the fact that almost every one of these movies has an incredibly badass soundtrack that is performed by some of the all-time greats of funk and soul music, including Isaac Hayes, Curtis Mayfield, Marvin Gaye, and yes, of course, James Brown. By the time the mid-70s rolled around, the major Hollywood studios finally got wise to the fact that Black consumers were a viable audience and started producing their own versions of blaxploitation films, including Mandingo in 1975, Car Wash also in 1975, Which Way Is Up in 1977, and The Wiz in 1979. Later decades, up to present day, would see film parodies, homages, and references to blaxploitation, including I'm Gonna Get You Sucka in 1988, Jackie Brown in 1997, Black Dynamite in 2009, Django Unchained in 2012, and Get Out in 2017. Also in recent years, remakes were made of Shaft, Superfly, and Dolomite Is My Name. Now, Dave, this is a very brief history of blaxploitation, but no conversation about the genre is complete without talking about James Brown and specifically tonight's topic, the Payback. And to dig into that, I will pass the mic back to you.
Thank you, Mike. What a wonderful synopsis of the genre. One that I've explored. I remember having fun exploring this as a teenager and discovering these films and being like, whoa, what's going on here? What is this music?
Entertaining. They are wildly entertaining.
Oh, they are. They are. So let's chat a little bit about James Brown and the Payback in particular. The Payback is a funk song by James Brown, title track from the 1973 album of the same name. The song's lyrics, originally written by trombonist and bandleader Fred Wesley, but revised heavily by Brown himself soon before it was recorded. The lyrics concern the revenge he plans to take against a man who betrayed him. James Brown's tour director, Alan Leeds, mentions the background to the song in his autobiography. A young lady in Brown's camp was having an affair with Harold Melvin. JB had just caught wind of her broken loyalty before he was about to record Revenge, a song Fred Wesley had sketched out for the opening scene in Hell Up in Harlem, which was the sequel to Black Caesar, which James Brown and Fred Wesley did the music for. James tossed Wesley's lyrics aside and began freestyling what quickly became the Payback. The song uses a sparse, open arrangement and wah-wah guitar, a relative rarity in Brown's previous funk recordings. It was recorded in February 1973, but it was released as a two-part single in 1974. It was the first in an unbroken succession of 3 singles by Brown to reach number 1 on the R&B charts that year, and the last chart toppers of his career. It also peaked at number 26 on the Billboard Hot 100. It was his second and final single to be certified gold by the RIAA. It is one of his most famous songs and an especially prolific source of samples for record producers. I want to talk a little bit about the album. The Payback is the opening song of the album of the same name. The Payback album is the 37th studio album by James Brown. 1973,
Fucking crazy.
37 albums. The guy had a career that spanned 50 years. It was originally scheduled to become the soundtrack for the blaxploitation film Hell Up in Harlem, but was rejected by the film's producers, who dismissed it as the same old James Brown stuff. That movie was the sequel to Black Caesar, which Brown and leader Fred Wesley composed the soundtrack. Payback album is considered a high point in Brown's recording career and is now regarded by critics as a landmark funk album, as well as one of Brown's best albums. It is his only studio album to be certified gold. Mr. James Joseph Brown was born May 3rd, 1933 in Barnwell, South Carolina, and is considered the central progenitor of funk music. The Brown family lived in poverty in Elko, South Carolina, which was an impoverished town in 1933. They moved to Augusta, Georgia when James was 4 or 5. His family first settled, and this was an interesting tidbit to come across, at one of his aunt's brothels, and later moved into a house shared with another aunt. Okay. Brown's mother eventually left the family after a contentious and abusive marriage and moved to New York. Brown began singing in talent shows as a young child, first appearing in Augusta's Lenox Theater in 1944, winning the show after singing the ballad So Long. While in Augusta, Brown performed buck dances for change to entertain troops from Camp Gordon at the start of World War II, as their convoys traveled over a canal bridge near his aunt's home, which is also where he first heard the legendary blues musician Howlin' Wolf play guitar. Buck dances, I learned, is a type of folk dance where you stomp your feet to accentuate the beat and keep a rhythm. I learned a lot with this research. He learned to play the piano, guitar, and harmonica during this period and became inspired to become an entertainer after hearing Caledonia by Louis Jordan and his Timpani Five. In his teen years, he even briefly had a career as a boxer. He's referred to by various nicknames, among them Mr. Dynamite, the hardest working man in show business, Minister of New Super Heavy Funk, Godfather of Soul, King of Soul, and Soul Brother number 1. In a career that lasted more than 50 years, he influenced the development of several musical genres. Brown was one of the first 10 inductees into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame on January 23rd, 1986. His whole discography has been heavily sampled by hip-hop musicians and other artists. He began his career as a gospel singer in Toccoa, Georgia. He rose to prominence in the mid-50s as the lead singer of the Famous Flames, a rhythm and blues vocal group. During the 1960s, late 60s, Brown moved from continuing with blues and gospel-based forms and style to a new approach to music making, emphasizing stripped-down interlocking rhythms that influenced the development of funk music. By the early 1970s, Brown had fully established the funk sound after the formation of the JBs, with records such as Get Up, I Feel Like Being a Sex Machine, and The Payback. He also became noted for songs of social commentary, including the 1968 hit Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud. Brown recorded and released 17 singles that reached number 1 on the Billboard R&B charts, and also holds the record for the most singles listed on the Billboard Hot 100 chart that did not reach number 1. He's all over the place. Many famous musicians worked with him, including Maceo Parker, Fred Wesley, and Bootsy Collins, who all went on to work with Parliament and Funkadelic. Now we're going to get a little heavy. A full biography of James Brown cannot be complete without at least some coverage of his terrible record of domestic violence and abuse of women. His own upbringing featured domestic violence sufficient enough to cause his mother to leave the family, and was exacerbated by his use of drugs, specifically PCP, which he was arrested for multiple times. So, on that heavy note, let's talk about the Payback. Mike, what did you think of this song? When did you meet this song? Talk to us about your relationship with this song.
Well, the thing that immediately comes to mind as we are talking about it as part of our chronology of heavy and in relationship to any kind of timeline, I think about our timeline as friends. That is meeting at San Francisco State University as college students. And we listened to probably as much James Brown as we did Black Sabbath then. James Brown has been a regular part of my diet for a long time. And honestly, funk and soul music from this era, the Payback, James Brown, Isaac Hayes, Curtis Mayfield, all of that stuff is legitimately some of my favorite music of all time. It is, and just the most listenable and digestible and stuff that I have listened to various degrees of voraciousness kind of my whole life. My sisters were James Brown fan, were super into Al Green, not exactly the same thing, more soul than funk, but that kind of music has always kind of been in my life from when I was a little kid to when I was a college student, and increasingly so over the years. It's always in some rotation for me, and that includes a lot of the hip hop that you talked about in influencing. I mean, you can't even begin to list the artists that were influenced by or sampled James Brown in hip hop, because the list is just sparked. Hip hop almost doesn't exist without James Brown.
No, and to your point, I omitted the list of just artists that just sampled the Payback because it was as long as my intro.
Yeah, his
No joke.
yeah, I mean his influence is so far and wide, but also just the listenability and the greatness of the music the man made is immense. And it you don't have to listen hard to hear it. You don't have to study it. You don't need to listen to it a bunch of times to get it. Like it's just good from the jump, and it stays good no matter how long you listen to it. All of that said, I kind of struggled to get my head around including the Payback in our chronology, just because I have never considered it as heavy. But the more I listened to it and the more I thought about it, I mean, what's heavier than a song about revenge? But there is so much in it that is heavy, and everything you just described in James Brown's backstory, certainly heavy. His life was heavy. So I'm really glad we're talking about it tonight. This, I do this a lot, and sometimes you call me on it, and it's just I get excited by the moment, and I'm like, oh, this is a top 5 favorite song of mine of all time, or I do that almost every episode because I get excited. The Payback is one of those songs that when I hear it, it's hard for me to think of any song in the world that I like better than the Payback. It's
Right.
that good. It's that good.
Right.
It's sort of our Black Sabbath episode when we do a Sabbath album episode, and then we have to pit it against other Black Sabbath albums. The one we always choose is the one we're talking about because it's so good in the moment. You can't think of anything being better. That's kind of how the Payback is to me. If it's not my favorite James Brown of all time, it's it's in the handful of greatest James Brown songs of all time, let alone funk and soul. So it's one of those songs where you hear the Payback and you immediately hear like you hear the rhythm of the song just by hearing the name of the song.
Right.
And I think you I'm not going to say I know definitively you were the one back in college that turned me on to the JBs as an instrumental group. I remember you had a double disc CD of the JBs, and it's just all their music without any James Brown, with no vocal.
Yeah, it's the instrumental years.
It's incredible. I mean,
It's so good.
it's
It's
so
so
good,
good.
and that has stayed with me, since you exposed me to it then, and um, so there's so many facets to this that make it a great song. And then the heaviness again, yes, it comes from the lyrics for sure. Yes, it comes from knowing everything about James Brown. Yes, it comes in the context heavy in the context of blaxploitation, but also just the rhythm. Specifically, we talked about the wah wah guitar, which is awesome, but I think it's the rhythm section, the drums and the bass that drive the Payback, and that sort of almost hypnotic rhythm across
Yeah,
the what is it, like almost 10-minute song or something.
right.
um that really to me is what sold me, and like, yes, you're right, Dave, we have to talk about the Payback. This song is heavy.
Awesome. I too can't think of this song without elevating it to an apex song, uh, and for all the same reasons. Both the musical content and lyrical content itself, it is a stripped down, elemental version of funk, and a lot of his music has a fuller quality to it because there's more instruments playing at once. But something that this song exemplifies, that is a hallmark, a benchmark of his music, is that it is so tight. It is
Mm-hmm.
so precise, and the space for the wah wah to kind of float, is there because the tightness of the rhythm and the snappiness of the drums, uh, and the intro that you gave of blaxploitation is critically important to why I find this heavy. James Brown's life was a blaxploitation film. Like he
Well said.
lived a blaxploitation film, and the fact that our conversation has evolved as the civil rights movement was playing out in the country, there isn't a song that touches on that as well as this song does, um, and brings it right up to the front. And that's a heavy subject. It's very fraught, and it has such a legacy. It was the manifestation of a legacy, and it is a legacy of now. Um, there's so much wrapped up in this song, and the passion that he brings with his vocals gives life to the desperation, to the strife. Um, there's a there's a quality of James Brown when you see him performing, or clips of him performing, where he is the hardest working man in show business. I mean, he is just shaking his tail off because that's what his choice was. That's what his option was. That's what the world allowed him to have. So, okay, world, that's what you give me. I'm going to take it, and I'm going to do it all the way. So it's defiance. There's a defiance there, I think, and there's a like a bitterness there, and I think that part of his story is this struggle with being famous, being a famous black man in a white man's world.
For sure, for sure. Defiance, I think, is a great word for this. And if you look at our timeline of all the songs we've talked about so far, and the blaxploitation part of it is huge. And I love your description of James Brown living a blaxploitation film in real life. Like that's perfect. When you debate the heaviness of the Payback versus anything we've talked about to date, James Brown by far had the heaviest life of any artist we've talked about to date. yes, you could talk about Sabbath or the Stooges being, rough working class kids, but they didn't have the challenges that Black America had or James Brown grew up in, as you described. I mean, the Beatles, the Stones, the Kinks, Cream, King Crimson, Zeppelin, none of those guys lived the street life, let's say, that is portrayed in this song and was the real life of the artist making the song. And that alone might make it the heaviest song we've talked about to date, even though it seems like the one that maybe fits, is the hardest to quickly define as being heavy.
Right. I mean, it's that, our benchmark Black Sabbath coming out of Birmingham, I always hear it described as gritty working class. But I feel like impoverished South Carolina is an order of magnitude
For a black
more,
man.
for a black man, is an order of magnitude more burden to
100%.
carry. And
100%.
and I don't know. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, it is. It does require a bit of a deeper listen to get to that level of contextual understanding in the umbrella of heavy, but not in terms of the way the song hits emotionally, not the way the music makes you want to get up and move, but it's in a sinister way. The song is kind of sinister.
Oh, it's sure. Yes, because it's talking about plotting a revenge scenario. It's talking about a revenge scenario for getting double crossed. And you're not going to take that sitting down. And here's what I'm going to do. That there's that defiance. In fact, there's a lyric that's misheard a lot.
It's on my list. It's the greatest.
Is it?
It's the
All right,
greatest.
I'm going for it. In the song, James Brown seems to say, "I don't know karate, but I know crazy." However, he's actually saying, "I don't know karate, but I know crazer." He had taken the line from a comedy routine by Clay Tyson, who was the comedian of the James Brown Review. And originally, the phrase was a punchline to a story about someone asking Tyson if he knew karate, with the implication that Tyson didn't need to know karate because he carried a straight razor. I mean, that's dark. That's dark. What kind of combat are you doing with a straight razor? That's up and dirty. Meanwhile,
that's real life.
It's real life. It's real life. And the other thing that I think helps frame this song is that on the album, the last song on the album is equally as heavy, and it is it's James Brown describing having mind power, because you have to have mind power to deal with the struggles of poverty and to deal with starvation, and he's recounting he's just painting a picture of what poverty is really like for an urban black person at this time, over this incredibly funky rhythm that breaks into this melodic transition, goes into solos by Fred Wesley, and cuts right back, and so sharp. It's so perfectly well executed, well timed, incredible musicianship. And so there's all these layers, and it really helps frame the beginning of the album end this way, after it's taken you on this journey. And it feels like it would have been, listening to the album as a whole, it feels like it would have been a soundtrack album, because it has some softer music, some kind of like love scene music,
kind of interludes on it.
Interludes, those are the right word. That's the right word. Go listen to the whole album.
The other thing the song does, and a lot of James Brown music does, is he regularly breaks what in film terms would be called the fourth wall. Breaking the fourth wall in a movie is when you look at the camera and talk directly to the audience. James Brown's version of breaking the fourth wall is talking to his band.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
in the Payback, when he does the let me hit him, hit him, Fred. And he's
Right.
talking to Fred Wesley, and
Right.
Fred was the leader of the JBs, and he would constantly do this call and response and reference his band. That is in sharp contrast again to most all of the music that we've talked about so far that is very produced. And that's what's so cool about James Brown, I think, is you talked about how tight the song is, how tight his music and it is. Like, it sounds great. It is really professionally produced, but it also has this spontaneous energy, like anything can happen, because
Right.
James Brown is freestyling and he's talking to Fred, and
Right.
he's
Right.
he's doing his he's kind of
Right.
scatting at times, and it's just so much looser than anything like certainly a Pink Floyd or a Deep Purple would have ever done.
Right.
That gives it this just other dynamic energy that I don't know if it necessarily makes the song heavier, but I think it brings you more into the reality of his world. And like, he is actually telling you a real story. It's not about wizards and dragons. It's
Right.
like, this
Right.
is happening right now to me.
Right. And the way he's doing it, like you said, draws you in because he's talking to you, and he's relatable because he's talking down to earth. It's just a dude who you're chatting with on the corner, or waiting in line, or in between something, and you immediately connect. And it's because he has that lived experience that he can just casually, um he's got casual swagger. If one can have a swagger that's casual,
James Brown
he
can.
can. He
Yeah.
does.
Yeah. The thing, he does a thing that many of my favorite songwriters do. And he almost always sings in the first person. That it
Yeah.
is I and me. I am telling you about what I know and what I've experienced, and what I'm going to do, not some story I heard, or not some history recounting or whatever. It's all personal, which I think,
Yep,
again, brings you in more to the world.
for sure. Now, I think in contrast, a band like Rush does a lot of the opposite, which is this abstract, poetic storytelling. And you can, if it's done well, like they do it well, you can get lost in the story. But it's a different kind of connection. It's this imagination. Whereas with this James Brown song and this James Brown presentation, you and he are in the moment together. It's him sharing his moment with you in a way that you get it, you relate to it, because there's some part of it that you share somehow. And I don't know anything about being an impoverished black man in the South in the 50s, but I do when I'm with James Brown.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he does that, and that is a real talent. Another artist I saw was Paul McCartney, and I saw him at the ballpark in San Francisco. 50,000 people, sold out, and it felt like I was there with Sir Paul. Just me, my dad, and Paul hanging out. It was so casual. The way he worked the crowd, he was having fun, but he's a master of his craft, both the music writing and the performance, and the music writing and the performance, right? The part where the performance is an interactive thing. It's not a display. It's it's the moment that we're all sharing, and it's being created in real time. That's really, really hard to do well, and to make it look so easy is mastercraft. This is what James Brown does. When you listen to him, it just feels like it's so easy for him to be so relatable, coming from a world I really know nothing about.
McCartney's a really good comp. Yesterday, all my troubles seem so far away. Michelle, my bell. Mother Mary comes to me seeking words of wisdom. It's
Right.
it's
He's
happening
sharing.
to him.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's room for both. Rush is great at what they do, but
Totally.
there is never a point when I listen to Rush where I am relating what is being sung about to the members of Rush themselves, which is almost my
Yes.
entire experience with James Brown and all of those rappers that would later go on and sample him. Almost every rapper, certainly of that era, was talking about their experience, and whether it was true or not, whether it was NWA or Nas, some of those things were true. Some of those were things they heard and represented it as first person narratives, but it was presented as, this is my struggle. This is my experience. This is what's happening to me. And I do think, back to the question of heavy, that gives the stories and the songs an added weight. So let's go back a little bit to a question I should have asked you at the top, and maybe this is how we'll start to wind it down. When did it occur to you that we needed to talk about a James Brown song, and how did you decide the Payback was the song we needed to talk about?
Good question. As our conversation was evolving, and as I was looking through the list and seeing the Beatles, King Crimson, Captain Beefheart, um,
When we were starting to
who
get
else?
out there a little bit with the define the, with where it was getting blurry, what's heavy and what's not.
Well, and then Funkadelic, Alice Coltrane. Um, yeah, like looking at these, in our next week's song, Betty Davis.
What?
There's a lot of threading the needle that we're doing in this conversation, and it felt like, because conversation the conversational definition of heavy isn't strictly reduced to sonic heaviness,
Mm-hmm.
that it allows for uh, a figure like James Brown, and it really mandates that we have to talk about a figure like James Brown.
Yeah, you were right. You were right. I will certainly concede. And when that clicked for you, was it immediately, oh shit, it's the Payback we need to talk about, or was it James Brown and now I'll figure out what I want to bring in?
It was the latter, and I settled on the Payback. Actually, I'm glad that you asked that part, because we try to avoid the obvious hits,
Mm-hmm.
but this is the apex obvious hit, except for Papa's Got a Brandy Bag, or I Feel Good,
This is so much heavier.
because it's so much heavier.
Yeah.
But I mean, in his career, it is the one album that went gold, and it's the
Right.
last that was on the top 100, or that went. I said what I said before. And so it felt like it's okay that this is a known song. It helps bring listeners into the conversation sideways, right? Because this song is a sideways on our list song. And it might tickle some interest, like, well, I know that song. How the hell are they going to weave this into their heavy tapestry?
Mm-hmm.
Well, folks, this is our attempt. You can judge for yourself if it's successful or not, but I think it's part of the picture. And until we weave that thread into the tapestry, the picture is incomplete.
Yeah. Yeah, well said. And we, as we get into the 80s, there are some hip hop songs coming up. So this might not be the last time we talk about James Brown. But let's see
That's
how.
kind of another benchmark of our conversation, is the callback, right? We will have reason to talk about him again, and we would have talked about him regardless, and so it's best that we feature him to call back to him.
For sure. And I think, when people think funk, particularly in 2026, I think they think of things like the Red Hot Chili Peppers. things that are, and maybe that's a bad example, but I things that are,
You're dating yourself, Michael.
well, I think people associate funk broadly with kind of dance music or high spirited energy, and not darkness and brooding.
I
And
think a lot of people
70s
reduce
funk has a
funk.
lot of that.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of people reduce funk to slap bass,
Right.
and you don't really find that in James Brown music. But my God, it's funky.
It is really funky. Well, let's see how the funk does. So every week we pit the current episode song against our Song v Song champion, which is currently Frankenstein by the Edgar Winter Group for each of us. That song was discussed back on episode 41. So we have held it. We each held it as our champion across several episodes now. Dave, how is Frankenstein going to do against the Payback?
Tonight, Frankenstein yields to the big.
You and me both. You and me both. The Payback. I should have gone first, so I didn't sound like I was biting you. But no, the Payback is too good.
I should have introduced it since I'm the host tonight.
Fair. I you know how I get excited. Yeah, it's the Payback is just too undeniable. It's been with me a lot longer than Frankenstein as kind of an important song, and it's just great. And you surprised me a little bit with it. As much as I love James Brown, I didn't have him on the list originally. So I'm glad we got to him.
I'm glad when I can bring a little something to the podcast.
You do every week, my friend, and I always love it when you host. It's funny I didn't include James Brown because prior to you adding the Payback to our list, I already had next week's song. So how I had Betty Davis but not James Brown on the list is a little bit beyond me. But I discovered Betty Davis a few years ago. I will get into the details of that when we actually talk about it next week. But we are going to talk about if I'm in luck, I might get picked up next week to close out the year of 1973. That will really be a continuation of tonight's conversation, getting into 70s funk and soul, and a great song. For those of you that haven't heard it, go ahead and listen. Dig into the History of Heavy Spotify playlist. You can hear all of our songs, both past conversations and future, including the Payback and Betty Davis. But listen to that as homework for next week.
Let us know what's your favorite, and if the current song knocks it out, or if you have a reigning champion so far.
Yeah, we have had listeners chime in songs that have been added to our list. So if you do, dear listener, have suggestions, they can't be anything prior to 1973 because we've gone through those, but anything 1974 and forward is fair game. So send those in. We'd love to add anything to the mix that makes sense in the context of heavy. And as you can see, that definition is very broad.
It is indeed.
All right, Dave, take us home.
We've done it again. We have done it again, folks. And thank you again for joining us on this conversation. And as always, stay heavy.
Okay, thank you. Bye.